Like to call to order this Thursday, January 16th at 6 p.m., our Sustainability Committee of the City of Tarpon Springs, Florida. Can I get a roll call, please?
Chairperson Larson.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Robinson.
Here.
Mr. Mandalou.
Here.
Miss Menino.
Here.
Mrs. Gallagher.
Here.
Mrs. Sanger.
Here.
Miss Nelson.
Here. Thank you for that. Next, we have the approval of our minutes. So I just want to make a note that there was an addendum that was sent around to all of us. So the motion that we would be approving the minutes would be the minutes as amended. So can I get a motion to approve those minutes, please?
Motion to approve.
Yeah, second motion.
And was that Mr. Mandalou?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, motion carries. So the next thing on our agenda, well, first, before we get too far, I just also want to say welcome back, everybody. Happy 2020. Can't even believe that we're here. You keep, I growing up, you hear like 2020, it's just like far off horizon, and here we are.
Sci-fi.
Very sci-fi. So welcome. I hope everybody's off to a good start, and excited to keep going with the work that we've been doing so far. And the next item is our presentation from the City of Sarasota on their climate adaptation plan, and that's going to be given to us by their sustainability administrator, Stevie Freeman Montez, via Skype. So thank you very much for presenting to us tonight, Stevie, and taking time out of your schedule to be with us. So very much appreciated.
One second, because I think we just lost Stevie.
Oh,
Yep.
actually, I think I just got back on. Can you hear me?
Okay, there you are.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I thought, man, just as I'm being introduced, we have a technical issue, but hopefully it works its way out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to talk to you all. And hopefully what I talk about today kind of hits on what you were envisioning, but I welcome any questions. And of course, we'll have time at the end. First of all, I want to check in and make sure you can hear me and see me okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you for letting me also Skype in. I'm sure for sustainability of tailpipe emissions, the Earth appreciates it. So thank you. So I'm just going to start. If y'all can pull up the first slide, there's the second slide is the agenda. And I plan to go over the history and the current role of the City of Sarasota Sustainability Office and kind of how we came to be. And then I'll review some of our projects and end with some advice and lessons learned from, our role or my program that I've learned over the last 5 years here in Sarasota. Of course, open up Q&A. So if we go to the next slide, is it able to move forward? Okay, perfect. So for a little bit of background, our sustainability program was really started in about 2008-ish. A lot of sustainability programs throughout the United States were started around this time, where the federal government funded energy efficiency and conservation block grants, funded a lot of sustainability positions in local government, and that turned into those positions kind of proving their worth. And then a lot of positions were hired on full time after that grant was over. And so that's a little bit of history. I worked before coming here to Sarasota, Washington County, Oregon, as a sustainability coordinator, and also the city of Houston, right outside of Portland, Oregon, before coming here to Sarasota. And I've been here almost 5 years now. So I've been sustainability coordinator and then manager now here in Sarasota for about 10 years. I'm definitely really passionate about the professional field and can talk about that. But within the City of Sarasota program, I just wanted to mention that we're in the city manager's office, and so I get to participate as part of the executive staff team with all of the directors, and I report directly to our city manager. And I mention that because the way that disability programs they live in an organization seems to be very unique, vary a lot from organization to organization. For example, our program kind of evolved over the years. Position used to be under Public Works and solid waste recycling, really focused only on waste issues. And then over time, it got brought into the manager's office. And now we work on more wide-ranging projects and policy initiatives that are more than just waste. So some still live in just waste, some live in planning. I've configurations, but how I like to think of our sustainability program here at Sarasota is working on two buckets of projects: the internal project and the community-wide projects. So kind of how I draw scope around it in my mind. But the internal operation project is really looking at our city assets, our buildings, our fleet vehicles, anything that we own, and how we can be more sustainable or lower the environmental impact across our operations, like as a business unit. And then community-wide and projects are just like it sounds, more working with our city planners to also work on sustainability topics or issues as they come up and are prioritized throughout the community. And then when I go a level, when in this little tree here, if you go a level further, I also put our projects into buckets of waste issues, climate climate change, energy, and then education. And for the format of this, I was going to go through some examples of each of the projects that we have within these four topic areas: waste, climate, energy, and education. And we have different levels of work, including policies, projects, and educational initiatives across all of those topics. Really, I'll probably dig deeper into climate action planning. I heard that might be something the committee is.
Stevie, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I apologize, but we're having some sound issues, so I just want to make sure that we can all hear you clearly. So
Oh, sure. Thank you for letting me know.
we're getting some feedback, so we're trying to adjust some things to see if we can.
Don't worry about yours. I think it might just be these two.
You want to go ahead and try again and see where we're at?
Yeah, testing here. Is this any better? Is it still feedback?
Connection.
Okay, we think it may be with the Skype connection.
Oh, bummer. Would it be helpful if I called in to a number and y'all turn off my voice, but I'm on a speakerphone or anything? But I know it's a big room, that might not work well, but.
We have an idea, I think. So I apologize again.
That's okay. We have an improviser in the group that's getting creative at the moment, I bet.
It's like they're feeding in at different times.
Right.
The
It's
speakers.
the issue is it almost sounds like we hear you and then there's kind of an echo. So
I can hear an echo on my end too.
Better reconnect.
But I was just kind of working with it.
That's better.
that seems better now. Maybe Mike did something just now.
Okay, I'm gonna just talk
Yeah,
for a little
go
bit
ahead
here.
and go ahead
Is
and
that
keep
better?
going. Thank you.
Okay, feel free to jump in if it's getting too obnoxious, for sure. Okay, so still on this slide here. So like I said, I'm just going to go over some examples of projects, but then was planning to dive deeper into the really the climate action planning and the climate change vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan, and just talk about the process that we went for both of those, and then I'll end with the lessons learned through some of the work so far. But if you go to the next slide, this is just when I say we work on waste management issues, what I also see our program really doing is kind of doing those above and beyond type services or initiatives that the community members really want, but that we don't traditionally do. For example, our solid waste and recycling definitely provide. They're on the streets picking up our residential and curbside solid waste services, but they might not have the capacity to do a lot of the neighborhood association education. They definitely don't have the capacity to try to do food scrap collection or composting efforts. And then single-use plastics has been a big issue over the last couple of years. And so that's where we get to step in and kind of go above and beyond the solid waste and public works department to fill in these gaps and work on these issues in addition to what they do. So we do, out of my program, which is just me and one other staff person, we do education on it. We just recently went single stream for our recycling, all into one bucket. Previously we had residents separating it out, so that took a lot of education to make sure we didn't have high contamination rates. We also do business recycling audits and make sure that our restaurants and businesses around town are adhering to our mandatory recycling program, and we partner with a nonprofit. I'll go into this one a little more detail later because it's kind of unique and exciting, but we have a neighborhood park community compost program, and that's a picture of it there. We're in 3 of our neighborhood parks. We have compost stations where residents that live nearby can walk their food scraps over. They're just vegetable food scraps, and we have these decentralized stations for composting, and it's been really successful to dispel some myths around composting and a well-run system and what that looks like, and it's actually gotten people a lot more comfortable with doing home composting. So anyways, that's what I'm really passionate about. And we're trying to do more restaurant food scrap collection efforts, but we have some challenges around industrial processing of large scale material. We don't have an industrial processing facility, so we have to make sure we get that right when you have certain volumes and scale it correctly. So can talk about that. But we also implemented a policy to prohibit single use or to prohibit styrofoam, polystyrene materials in public properties and special events, and also to make any single use drinking straw, whether it's paper or plastic, only available upon request. And there's a lot of details into why we did it that way, but I can speak to that if it's of interest at the end, if there's questions on it. And I'll just pause here before I'll go to the next, the climate, but how's the audio right now?
It's a lot better. Thank you.
Great. So if we go to the next slide for climate, so I think, let me just see if I actually have another slide that goes into detail later about the climate change vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan, but that's really our planning document and initiative that has helped us really get cohesive and clarity and more comfortable as staff around sea level rise planning and understanding our projections for sea level rise, for extreme precipitation events, and for heat, and where we were vulnerable in our infrastructure that we own and the services that we provide, and how we started to prioritize and come up with adaptations for our biggest priority items through this planning effort. And I'll go into more detail because that was a huge undertaking and something we're really proud of and still trying to implement a lot of it. And then a lot of our climate change work also is around resilient shorelines. So we're obviously coastal communities. So we're trying to work around our vulnerable shorelines where we have dilapidated seawalls, what other options we have. And we've done a couple pilots to test out on our bayfront. We actually had an old seawall that was crumbling. We were just going to put up another seawall, but we actually did not put up the seawall, and we did kind of a living shoreline. And that was kind of rare for us. Typically, we would just put up a new seawall, but this living shoreline has a lot more habitat and wave deflection and climate adaptation benefits. And it ended up being really successful and costing a lot less than a seawall did. So that was an exciting pilot that I think we're now actually implementing into the way we do business. Before we replace any seawall, we assess the site conditions to see if a softer, more environmentally friendly solution can be considered for that site. So the living seawall is a more hardened, that's the picture there. This is was really a business idea from a local, the Reef Ball Foundation, and Reef Initiatives or Reef Innovations that's here at Sarasota, where they had these ideas to put kind of habitat modules in front of an area that really needs a seawall. That area wasn't able to survive, or to, a living shoreline couldn't survive based on analysis. So these are like just habitat modules is kind of what I would say, where the reef balls are in the center and it's built to kind of deflect wave energy. That's the idea, is that when waves hit it, this ball in the center will deflect the wave energy, so there's not scouring and preventing of seagrass right in front of it, but it also creates habitat, whereas a seawall, just a plain seawall before, would not have a lot of habitat for filter feeders and other fish. And that's also gotten a lot of attention, but we are studying this one because it is so new. We want to make sure we understand how it performs before we do more of them. So we've partnered with Mote Marine Laboratory to study this over 2 years to see really what the habitat benefit is and what the wave deflection benefit is. So in October, we should be getting the final report on that. We also, out of our office, conduct greenhouse gas inventories for both internal operations and the community. So we actually measure, there's different methodologies or different ways we do the different sectors, but really looking at our local electric grid, makeup and what our kilowatt hours are for residential, industrial, commercial, energy. We can get a carbon footprint analysis, and then we also do some transportation estimates based on surveys and gasoline sold in the city limits and other factors, and get some overall community inventory of what our biggest emission sources are. And we do the same things for our city facilities, so we can understand our buildings, footprints, and our fleet vehicle impact and that sort of thing. So that's a really good foundational document to help us prioritize projects, I would say. And then I'll go to the next slide, if we could please, thank you. This is some of our energy projects. One of the ones that has taken up the most of my time the last few, last year really, is called Partners for Green Places. It was a grant program that started and was funded from two of our local foundations, and it offers local nonprofits in Sarasota County a really deep energy audit and an energy roadmap that helps give them information of what the ROIs are with different energy upgrade opportunities. And then the second phase, those nonprofits can apply for matching grants to actually do some of those energy upgrades. And the whole idea is to help nonprofits save money so they can put it back into their missions, and also recognizing that nonprofits often have unique funding cycles that are hard to put operational dollars to upgrading facilities for energy efficiencies, and also aren't eligible for a lot of tax credits and some other things that private businesses are. So it's been really successful, and we've been working with 16 nonprofits and have provided all the deep energy roadmaps, but we're just now getting into the second phase where we fund the actual projects. The second one, I'll go into a little more detail, so I will skip that here, but it's called Ready for 100, and that's our kind of climate action planning initiative, I would say. And FPL Solar Together, who is Tarpon Springs electric utility?
Duke.
It's a Duke, okay. So you may have followed the FPL announcement for their Solar Together program, but they have a large community solar, what they call it community solar program, where we can subscribe. It's a subscription service to a large solar farm and actually get credit from that energy that's produced from that solar farm on our bill. So over time, we actually receive financial benefit as a city and can ultimately offset 100% of our energy use with solar power, and slowly get a financial benefit too. So it's we pre-registered for that, and it's at the Public Service Commission at the state for approval right now. Actually, I think there was hearings today, so it's a little still unknown if it will move forward, but it's a massive investment by FPL that we signed up for and we wanted to support. And always looking for internal energy efficiency. This is something we could do better on, but how I would like to do better on how we monitor our internal energy and prioritize actions for our operations. But we do projects, based on LED retrofits here, and we work with our facilities. But I think it's stuff we do, but we don't have a great approach to it, and something we hope to focus on this next fiscal year. And we have, oh, sure.
The sound started going echo again. Did you happen to move something with your microphone versus a speaker or something like that?
No, let me try one.
We can't hear you.
Oh, okay, so that's definitely not better.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure something didn't change.
Oh, that's a bummer. Sorry about that. Okay, well, if we want to go to the next slide. And this is just some of the examples of educational efforts that we do, lunch and learns on different sustainability topics, and lots of presentations. Periodically, we do cleanup events, and we also host an Earth Day festival. And if you can go to the next one. And the next one. So this is where I was going to go into a little more detail about our climate vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. I could definitely talk for an hour just on the process we went through on this, because I'm really passionate about it. But we looked at over 220 city-owned assets and identified, what was vulnerable to future climate conditions. So we looked at assets in our transportation system, the city-owned streets and intersections, our stormwater, and we got to the point of actual outfalls and different stormwater pipes and infrastructure, our water supply, wastewater infrastructure, emergency operations centers, and our public parks and shorelines. So those were all the sectors we looked at. In total, we looked at 220 individual assets. And then we overlaid future conditions for sea level rise and flooding and heat. Well, and we did this kind of big roundtable like you see in the picture at the bottom there. We did a big roundtable where we rated the adaptive capacity of each asset and the sensitivity, and essentially gave scores for both the risk and the vulnerability. And we graded them and we graphed them, and those assets that were deemed both highly at risk and both highly vulnerable bubbled up to the top quadrant, and those are ones that we move forward to a next phase to identify adaptation options for. So there's a deep methodology that we went through, and we did receive help from a consultant on this, and we're able to use Deepwater Horizon local claim funds that we received to fund that consultant. So yeah, that's just a little background on that. Next slide. So the Ready for 100 initiative is what I would describe as our climate action planning effort. But in 2017, our city commission passed a resolution that set a target of 100% renewable energy community-wide by 2045, and then for city operations by 2030. And I was really nervous that we had a bunch of community members just come and ask the city commissioners to set this target. And they did, but I was definitely nervous as a staff person of, well, don't you want to know how feasible it is or how we would get there first? And it actually ended up working out well because it set a really big policy vision. And for our dynamics here, it kind of gave us that political support to go out and try to figure it out together with these really passionate community members that showed up to the commission meeting. And so we went on a year and a half long planning process really to try to garner this community energy around it and try to figure it out together. And we actually, if you go to the next slide, we went through 6 meetings in 1 year. No, it was like about, I think it was every 3 months. So maybe it was 4 meetings in a year. And then we presented to City Commission at the end. But what we really started with for the Ready for 100 initiative was an initial kickoff meeting where we had a huge turnout. We said, okay, community members, you've asked us to set this target. We want to hear ideas from you, how we should reach this. What are your strategies and your ideas that you had? And we broke it up into different corners of the room and had everybody write down their ideas based on how businesses and residents could transition to 100% renewable energy and do energy efficiency, strategy ideas for municipal operations, for transportation, and then for our utility. And our utility, FPL, was at every one of these meetings. So that was an interesting addition, but they ended up being really good, and they participated in the last ones, actually presented and stuff. But we gathered all these ideas, and then at the second meeting, we as staff kind of went through and filtered through some that weren't really relevant. But then at the second meeting, we identified criteria of how we wanted to evaluate those ideas that were generated by the community, and us as staff also identified strategies. And we essentially did this big voting exercise and prioritization exercise where we said, well, which ones do we think will have the most local job creation? Which ones prioritize energy efficiency first? Which ones target historically marginalized communities or low-income households? And which ones might have a climate adaptation like co-benefit? And we had all this criteria we decided on together, and then we voted on them. And it resulted in us having priorities that we then created a plan. And at the next meeting, we had everybody review the document and give us feedback. And the last meeting was really quite a celebration, and we felt like we all kind of went through it together. There was a kind of a core group of 40 or so residents that would show up at these meetings. And by the end, we had a lot of people support it. And And I think it was really helpful. What I think is lacking in our approach is some of the technical analysis of how far each strategy would go to getting us to our ultimate goal. But I do think that we got a lot of that community input and buy-in, which I think ended up working well for us. And now our next phase might be to try to get some of that technical analysis done. Next one. I kind of already mentioned this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but the neighborhood compost programs, this is just a small, we partner with a nonprofit that trains residents on how to, or what they can put into their kitchen collection bin. And then the residents are able to walk their food scraps over to these community stations. And they actually log how they weigh their kitchen bucket, and they log their amount that they collected at home. And it's turned into kind of this fun competition of who's collected the most, but we're able to have really good data on how much the programs are diverting from the landfill, which has been really great to have them weigh it. But this is only done because we have a nonprofit partner here locally that's able to help train the residents, and they actually go and visit all the compost stations and make sure that there's no issues, no smells, that they're like getting to the temperature they need to. They kind of make sure everything is running. So we actually started financially supporting that nonprofit to maintain these neighborhood compost stations, and we obviously offered the land because they're in neighborhood parks as well. So it's a unique model, but it's small scale, but it's grown. We have over 100 residents that are contributing to these programs. So and there's waiting lists because it can't grow indefinitely, that we have to keep them kind of small scale. So we're looking to expand that though, to have more community compost stations around the city. Next slide. And actually, if you could go to the next slide. I just wanted to mention this one because it's a partnership with the Arbor Day Foundation, and we do a community, we call a community canopy program, where residents can go online and essentially shop for a free tree. They feel like they're shopping because there's about 5 options, but you can actually drag and drop the tree around the footprint of your home, and it projects what your energy savings are based on when the tree is 20 years old, and the tree, you select what its shading benefits are. So it's supposed to raise awareness on the shading benefits of trees and the energy saving benefits. But then once you shop and you press kind of checkout, even though it's free, but it's then mailed directly to your doorstep. And this is all managed from the Arbor Day Foundation, and we pay a certain amount. This is paid through our tree mitigation funds. And it's been really successful. The trees get reserved out within 48 hours, sometimes 24 hours, and we're able to see where communities are reserving the trees. Like it's all mapped live. So we've also seen maybe some communities or neighborhoods that weren't taking part in the program, and we could tailor, we've changed, we've tried to tailor our outreach or done in-person giveaways, and different things. So just wanted to mention that because I think that's another program that we're proud of. But if you could just skip ahead, I'll go to the last slide on advice and lessons learned from my perspective, and then I'd love to just hear if there's any questions or questions on any of these projects, or kind of how we implement things in general. So you can go one more. So for me, as my experience working in sustainability at a smaller-ish city, we're 54,000 year-round residents, medium-sized city, I guess. It's been really important to work with partners, with nonprofits and foundations to get more done. We don't have a large department like a lot of the big cities do, so that's been something that I reflected on when preparing for this presentation. That was, I think, really important to our work being successful. And then I do feel like we've had to rely a little more on consultants for some of the technical analysis, because we just don't have some of that capacity on site on our staff like a lot of larger cities do. And I do think that although it takes time, that community meetings and community engagement, just like it sounds like what your committee is all about and what you all are doing, really builds that course, support well before the policy is in place. So I know oftentimes here at the city, a lot of staff doesn't enjoy that community engagement. You know, they are strong at other things, but they don't enjoy that. But it's come back and not worked well at the end. So I think that's kind of obvious, but I think it's worth mentioning because for the Ready for 100 initiative, that's been really successful for us. And one of the challenges I feel like with anything, but definitely with sustainability, has been that kind of balance between the planning and the doing. You know, we want to have well-informed program and prioritized based on data and all of that, but sometimes I feel like we've planned a lot. Like for the climate adaptation plan, took almost 2 years from start to finish, and we wanted to balance that with doing some projects that we knew that were important, and how you fund all of that and time it, I think, is something we're always trying to balance, the planning and the implementation. I also think with sustainability, we did a survey, a community survey, and we realized that although we felt like we were doing a lot, that not a lot of people knew about it, and didn't necessarily feel like the city valued sustainability. So I feel like telling the story and doing the media and the marketing helps create that culture change for a city, and is actually a really important part of a sustainability program to kind of share what you're doing, and also how residents or businesses can get involved in different ways, and being mindful about that communication aspect is an advice or lesson I would say. And I also just wanted to point out that there's a lot of networks too for sustainability, local government staff at least, to rely on for best practices, and to maybe get policy language or code language, or a lot of times if we do RFPs for certain services, there's a Florida Sustainability Directors Network that's absolutely free, but you have to kind of have that role in a local government, and then we just work together to share best practices, and hold calls every other month. But it's really been good to have the connections there. So if Tarpon Springs is interested in doing more in that space, I just wanted to mention that there's these networks available. And then really that's all I had kind of formally prepared, but I would welcome any questions from anybody on anything we're doing.
Well, thank you so much, Stevie. That was a whole lot of information that's really concisely conveyed, and very much appreciate you taking the time to put it together and share with us. So I'm going to open it up to my board, or to the committee rather, members. Does anybody have any questions right after that?
Oh, I have a lot of questions. But one of the first ones, just in reading your climate adaptation plan, there's so much heavy technical work in the beginning of this plan, just to outline where we are at this given moment on planet Earth. I mean, it's not just a community issue, it's a global issue. So I wonder where this information was drawn from. Obviously, it's not work that the city did. Who were your consultants in getting this information? What sources did you have? Because I guess I didn't get to the end where I might have seen a bibliography of the sources.
Yeah, there's so much information there, but I would say we did work with HDR consultants, so they were hugely helpful in the technical side of things. I would say for our projections, it was really important for us to kind of get approval by our city commission on the projections and our data sources of what we were going to use for sea level rise, for flooding, and for heat. And we have different sources for each one of those, but we used NOAA 2017 sea level rise projections that are calibrated based on the St. Petersburg tidal gauge. So that just means they're definitely locally informed rate of changes, that we used in ours. So we have locally informed projections there. And then for extreme precipitation, that one was a little harder, and I'm forgetting some of our data points on our sources on that. But for heat, we were fortunate to have a local temperature gauge at our airport, and so we could look at historical data and kind of trend forward from our historical rate of change we've seen over the last 40 years here locally. So it's kind of different for each source, but I would say having the consultants really helped us out. And we're also now a part of the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition, which I think has also been really helpful to just piggyback on what a group that's already working on the science and projections, and it's been vetted through there too.
That's awesome, thank you. I had one other question, because you said you've had experience working in sustainability as a sustainability manager in Portland, Oregon as well, or?
It was the city of Beaverton right outside of Portland.
Okay, so when you were on the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest, because I came from Seattle, and I know there's a big difference in the degree of seriousness about the issue, and it started earlier, perhaps. When you were at that office, where did the sustainability office live within the city structure? Because, I mean, to me, it's everything that it's integrated somehow so that everything revolves around that, or else what's the point? It's frivolous, right?
Right. At City of Beaverton, I was housed in the community planning department. So it was more with the planners. And I think I would have preferred, if it was up to me at that time, to be more in the mayor's office for City of Beaverton. But I would say, like City of Portland, I think their first climate action plan was in the 80s. I mean, they've been working on it for a long time, and they have a whole bureau of sustainability that has, probably 20 something at least staff. Like New York City has their own department with 50 something staff. Of course their sizes are all different and comparable, but some have their own unique departments. But here in Sarasota, I'm the city managers, but in Beaverton, I was in the planning.
And how do you see that you're integrated within everything that happens in the city? I mean, is it like a key piece, the sustainability plan?
I think for our organization right now, it's working really well because of how I'm sure each city is a little different in their structure and culture and interpersonal relations, but we're in the city manager's office, we have this executive staff team with all the directors meet weekly. And so I do get to be a part of that. And so I get to be looped into public works, planning, even IT, and all of the different departments, and we get to talk about issues, and they get to hear about what I'm working on because we update each other weekly. So in our dynamic, it's really been helpful to be working out of that office and be a part of that team so that I can kind of infiltrate the different departments.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Paul Robinson. Nice to meet you. I want to compliment you on a very thorough strategic plan. We're looking at several. This is I think, very well worked out, both in terms of the background material that you include, but also in terms of the resiliency that we're not necessarily seeing to the degree that you haven't incorporated that in your plan. The vulnerability index is very thorough. The breakdown into 6 different areas of vulnerability, extremely thorough. I have some specific questions. You talk about a heat vulnerability index in various parts of your plan, and you talk about shift work for city staff as a way of protecting city staff in terms of extreme heat. How is that? How do you decide what indices do you use to determine what shift work is safe and what is not for city staff?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've really thought through, the way we would determine that. We almost thought when it would get to that point, or as it gets to that point, I mean, there's sometimes during the summer where already it's just too much towards the end of the afternoon. And so, we were more thinking of it, I think, as a qualitative response to what we know is becoming more and more of an issue and will be in the future. But I haven't thought through really the detailed way we would determine that.
Well, we as a committee haven't talked about it either, but I think we will. There are guidelines both in sports organizations and military organizations using something called a wet bulb globe temperature, and I think we will be talking about that. And that instead of a qualitative, there are actually quantitative charts that can be utilized. What do you do if the wet bulb temperature is 94 and somebody's water main breaks? Do you send the team out, or do you protect them and keep them in an air-conditioned area? And I think that's a question, and your plan refers to this kind of question multiple times. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment that's making me think of, more that we need to do in that particular space. But one thing with the climate adaptation plan is that it was so much content that I feel like the adaptations at the very end ended up being very high level. And they definitely were meant to be a bit of a laundry list or starting point of the types of questions we need to think of, or the types of solutions we need to think of for our prioritized vulnerabilities. But we definitely knew it's going to need to go a lot deeper, especially with some of the infrastructure upgrades. We'll need, obviously design and engineering, but for that example, we'll need to go, we hope for it to be a launching point to think about the issues, but it would all have to be thought through a lot more.
You showed us in one of the first slides a living seawall, kind of a hybrid structure. How will you assess how well that functions over time?
So we asked for advice from Marine Laboratory to ask what they would recommend in terms of a methodology to assess it, and what they designed was a scientifically kind of relevant study that would look at that side compared to some sites nearby that have just a flat seawall. One side has mangroves, one side is a rubble kind of natural beach. And what they're doing is invertebrate and finfish surveys at certain times of the year on continuous basis. And then they also installed a wave detector device, to be able to read the energy of the waves at a certain period. And so that's been going for almost 3 years, and it even had some time before the hybrid habitat modules, the living seawall, was installed. So we're able to kind of compare before and after at the site, in addition to other nearby. Well, the wave sensor was just for the site, so we can't do it was too expensive to do the wave sensing at each of the comparable locations, but at least we'll have before and after to see how well they're deflecting the wave energy. But the others were invertebrate and finfish sampling, and I know Mote Marine was using interns a lot as well for some of that work.
It looked as though there might be sponges as part of that living seawall. Is that true, or were there other things there that just looked like them? That might play well in this town. Okay. Did you indicate that you also have a pilot study with living shorelines?
Yes. We received funding from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. They had a climate resilience funding opportunity, and they funded that living shoreline where I was mentioning that it was on the Sarasota Bayfront, and we had an old seawall that was crumbling, and we were just going to put a new seawall up because that's what we're used to doing. But we assessed the site. We had an engineer assess the site, and they said, actually, even though it's right on the bayfront, very direct wave energy, you could do a sloped kind of riprap with a living shoreline, and we think it would survive. And so we tested that out for the first time with funding from FDP, and so far it's going good.
Excellent. Thank you.
I was going to ask about the seawalls too, so he got to me first. But.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I have a couple questions. I'm Dory Larson. Hello. Question about when you were mentioning mandatory recycling for businesses. Can you talk a little bit in more detail about that, like how that came about?
I think we were unique, and I hate to say a year because I'm going to get it wrong, but I think it was in the early 2000s or even maybe the late 90s. We passed an ordinance, apparently at the city of Sarasota, that recycling was mandatory both by residents and businesses. And so what Jeff, who's the other staff person in my office, he goes out and visits businesses, maybe you know, couple times a month or a few times a month, and actually, just make sure that they are recycling. Because a lot of times we'll get calls too, often from condos or from people who live in condos or people who visit a restaurant and they're upset that they're not seeing recycling. So they want us to go kind of investigate. So we'll go out and look into it. And oftentimes it's happening, but behind the scenes, maybe cardboard. The restaurant often, because things come in plastic cups or bottles, the single use item is kind of contaminated with food, so they can't recycle it often there at the front. But cardboard or glass sometimes is behind. So, anyways, we just kind of go and assess that for businesses, and it's been mandatory for a long time.
I think that's great. I have another question about the vulnerability assessment. Was that done internally, and how was that funded?
Yes, so it was funded from the Deepwater Horizon local claim funds that the city got, and it was $111,000 we spent on the consultant for it. And HDR, really, we did an RFP. We received probably about 10 responses back in 2017, I think it was. And HDR really did lead us through each of the 6 steps, or I forget exactly how many steps there are, but they led us through each one. And as staff, I was the lead on it. So I was editing before we had meetings, and I was helping do preparation, but really they would lead, the creation of the documents to have us vote or evaluate the risk and the vulnerability. And, we led a lot of the community workshops around it, but they were there to answer questions. So it was a little bit of a mix, but I would say definitely HDR did the heavy technical lifting for that process.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about the composting program. Can you give kind of a rough cost estimate? You said that you're partnering with a nonprofit to make that happen.
Oh yeah. Well, we are paying them $745 a month to run three compost stations in 3 city parks. And that's really, I'm sure it costs a lot more, because of how much time they put into training. They field residents' calls on what should or should not go in. They go and check on all the compost stations to make sure they're running well. They help people who want to transition to a backyard compost station. So they kind of help go visit and set up station or compost bins in people's backyards. I mean, it's really a great nonprofit. But that's all that we're actually financially contributing. I'd like to contribute more, or at least expand it to other city park sites.
Do people get the soil back, or how is that?
Yeah. So they have an option. Those who participate in that park program, when it's harvest day, they come and can take their amount back, or they divvy it up and they take it back. But some people don't want it, and so if they don't want it and we have some leftover, we're able to use it in the park itself, and we use it as the city, so it's kind of nice too.
Great. I have a question about, so we've been having conversations in our committee about adaptation versus mitigation, and this is obviously the climate adaptation plan, but there's mitigation baked in, you can tell. So can you talk a little bit about how you decided to kind of combine the two ideas?
That's a really good question, because it's so hard. I feel like, from my experience, to draw scope around sustainability work, and I feel like there's so much that needs to be done, but there's also so much interrelated nature that the climate adaptation plan integrated some mitigation and greenhouse gas reduction issues. But really, for us, where the majority of our mitigation work lives is in that Ready for 100 initiative. because that's our strategies that are listed and prioritized for energy efficiency and renewable energy, all in a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So ours are somewhat separated just because of how we, have to allocate our time and our mental space. But we also want to do climate adaptation work and a resiliency plan for the community, for identifying where neighborhoods and business districts are vulnerable and things that they could do as private residents to be more resilient. And we haven't touched upon that yet. This was really just only city-owned infrastructure. So anyways, I just mentioned that there's a lot more work to be done, but I would say we still have kind of two different plans for that work.
So if we don't have either, we're kind of working through what that's going to look like. What would be your recommendation to do which first, or kind of try to do them simultaneously? I mean, it's like you said, it's hard if you're trying to keep focus on an energy in one of those. Where would you recommend?
I would recommend, I believe City of St. Petersburg is doing an integrated approach somehow, and I'm not too familiar with the details of it, but it might be one to look at on how they approach this. But I would recommend, if you do start with one or the other, to evaluate your projects based on the co-benefit of the other. So if you're doing a climate mitigation or action plan, prioritize projects or rate them higher if they also provide adaptation, such as tree plantings or, all those things, LID type projects. Those have climate adaptation benefits too. And then also, or if you decide to do a climate adaptation plan, evaluate the projects and strategies that also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And, working it into your prioritization is one way to really clearly, I think, tie the two together. But it's still sometimes not perfect. But that would be a recommendation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I think one last question is the community engagement piece. How did you guys draw the community in and really try to work with all different parts of the community, like LMI, and we've got so many different components of our community. So how did you do that?
Yeah, it's always a struggle. It's always something we're trying to adaptively kind of get better and better at. But for us, the Ready for 100 initiative, we were mindful of where and when we held the projects or held the meetings. And then we also decided to have the meetings every 3 months. February, I'm trying to think if there was every other month, but on the off months, we made a commitment to the group initially that we would spend those off months going to stakeholders, whether it's a neighborhood association meeting or we did some faith-based groups. We would say this month we can kind of focus on that and do a little mini meeting, but because not everybody's going to come to a government, meeting. So I think that kind of worked well for us, but it is a lot of time, and I think it takes a lot of commitment from the start to try to do that work. And another thing that I think helped with us is starting very early and creating a bit of a not I want to say celebratory, but a positive communication strategy that we're all in this together. We have data, we have information, but we want to hear from you. This is, we try to really line up, this is where we're going, and this is the stage that we're at. And whenever we had a second meeting, I would check off the previous meeting and I would check off the second. So it kind of helped, I think, build this journey together at each of our meetings that made it clear that there was an end point too, not just a initiative that goes on forever. But although we do meet twice a year still, even after we had our initial planning effort. So long story short, I think being mindful about where the meetings are and how you communicate it, and then you might have to change your recruitment or communications wording to touch upon the values of the community that you're trying to reach, and what is important to them, because climate change, for example, touches upon so many issues from public health to job creation. If you can kind of tailor why you're coming to them to something that's really important, it definitely helped. And we tried to do a little bit of that, but we got better at that at the end than we were at the beginning.
Great, thank you. And I apologize. I keep looking over at the TV, so I think you're seeing us front on. That's why we all keep looking over this way. Just realized that. I think those are all the questions that I had. Didn't.
I have, Stevie, great presentation. I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing. It's very, very inspiring to hear some of these different possibilities. I have just a quick question about the FDEP funding the living shoreline or participating in that. Can you tell me, was it a limited funding for a certain amount of time, or what that amount of funding was to start that process? Because it sounds like it was more experimental, like they were willing to just see if you could do it. It wasn't like you were, date certain, you have to have this done or whatever. It sounded more flexible. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, at the time that we got that funding, FDP was they were fairly new in their climate resilience funding. Now I think they're going to start having revolving set dates. And the contact we worked with was named Whitney Gray. So if staff wants to reach out to FDP, Coastal Resilience Program, I think that's what their office is called, or something like that. And they do have regular funding, and it was a fairly easier application process than a lot of other grants that we try to go for. And I think our living shoreline was around the 120,000 mark. And they were very flexible and very easy to work with. And I don't know when their next opening is for that particular funding, but it's definitely one I would recommend keeping an eye on for projects. Or I think they also fund planning. So if there is interest in creating this plan, like I think what I heard earlier, that may really be a funding opportunity. I can follow up with the staff I've been emailing with too, with the contact there and the grant name.
Thank you. When you talked about, there was something you talked about, and I was taking notes, but I don't have it sectioned off. When you talked about working with low-income families or communities that were in more challenging situations, could you tell me how you integrated? First of all, I'm impressed that you were mindful of that, but second, how you integrated those underserved parts of the city with you guys.
So I think what you're referring to is when I was speaking about the Ready for 100 initiative, which is what we call that, planning effort we were doing, is that when we received ideas from the community and when staff identified strategies and ways that we thought we could reach the 100% goal and do energy efficiency, we prioritized those strategies if they targeted low income or historically disenfranchised community. And we actually identified those into very specific, we try to get very specific about it, of neighborhoods that were primarily communities of color, low income, and also residents living with a disability, and our senior citizens in our community. So we had like 4 categories. And if that strategy had a target or a focus area that was targeted for either of those populations, we gave it a higher value than the other strategies.
Thank you, and thank you for also referencing the disability community. I think they're very unrecognized often, so kudos to you for bringing them into the conversation. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Paul, do you have any questions?
Hi, I'm Paul Smith. Stevie, am I looking at you now or now?
I don't really know how it works. It's like I'm everywhere all at once, I feel
Well,
like.
I want to say thank you to you. We've been working with Stevie over the past couple weeks coordinating this, and I want to thank you and the city of Sarasota for being so generous with your time. And I do plan to follow up. You all have done a lot of great things, and we know that it's a lot easier than reinventing the wheel is to talk to the people that have already worked with the wheel for a little while. So thanks very much. It's very helpful.
Well, thank you. And of course, anything that we can provide, I'd be more than happy to. I really love this line of work, so I'd be happy to share any resources we have. And kudos to y'all too. I saw the local government certification through FGBC and your solar installations and stuff. So y'all are definitely not at complete starting point by any means. So it's great to see the work that you're all doing too.
All right. Well, I think we've got all of our questions answered. I want to again thank you for your time. I know that it's after hours and it's very much appreciated. You giving up some of your time to be with us. So thank you so much. And
Great, thank you all.
Good night.
good night.
Good night.
Mike, thanks to you and staff. That ended up
Thank you, Paul.
fine.
Thank you.
It was a little shaky in the
Yeah,
middle.
excuse a few glitches with the new system, so.
Thank you. Look at us guinea pigs getting it done. All right, so the next item on our agenda is the continued discussion about the Climate Mayor's Steering Committee. So Paul, do you have some information that you want to share with us about that?
Well, since the last meeting, I did take a look at, there's a website. I also did talk to the city of St. Petersburg. I wanted to see what they think because, they're heavily involved in that. And my question was one of, the website it addresses that question, is there a commitment to this? What is the commitment? And the website says there really is no commitment except that you're committing that you're already working on these things, and the things they listed are the things we're working on. There would be sort of an alignment when you do join that if letters are sent out by these 400 and something mayors, that you'd be part of that message. I don't know if there's a lot of opportunity to modify the message, so there may be some concern from that direction, but the city of St. Pete, in their experience, didn't really see any commitments that came from it. In other words, pretty much what the website advised, so.
Okay.
I think the last question Denise had was, how does this compare to the Paris Agreement? And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, or.
The Paris Agreement or the Conference of Mayors versus Climate Mayors? That was my understanding.
There are cities that have signed on to the Paris Climate Accord, in lieu of us not participating as a country. But they've been doing this for a long time, they've been signing on to and I have not investigated it. I apologize, I could take the time to do that.
Well, Paul, didn't you point out last time that under Mayor Beliris, we signed an agreement or a resolution from the Conference of Mayors?
Right, that's
Okay.
correct.
But that doesn't mean that we became members of the Conference of Mayors, as I understand it. It was a one-time gig, I think?
I think so, but also I think the question now is a different one. These climate mayors is an entirely different group.
Yes,
And so formed in 2012, I'm going from memory here, and really activated in 2017, I believe, when the current president pulled us out of that. So there's been a lot of activity since then. So I think the question before you all now to discuss is this something that you do want to, bring to the commission? Even though it'd be something that the mayor would ultimately sign, the mayor would need the commission's approval to sign it. So it really would be a commission vote if that's something that you wanted to bring to them. I will advise you as well that reading back through the enabling resolution for our committee, you all are to provide a report to the commission by March 31st of each year. So you do have that opportunity coming up, and perhaps that could be part of your report. It doesn't necessarily have to be something you do right away, but it's coming up quickly, so.
That's pretty fast. We might want to include it in that as one of our recommendations.
Even if it is symbolic, I think it means a lot, in terms of what our city is embracing publicly. So I think it's worth pursuing it, and I will take time, and Paul, hopefully we can both maybe compare, at the next meeting, the differences between the two agreements. I'll look at the Paris Climate Accord and what that means when mayors have signed on to that, and hopefully speak with somebody about that.
Sure.
And I would suggest to you, if you do decide as a group to bring it to the commission, that, I think this is where you're going, is in your report or your presentation, maybe have some summary of, this is what we already did in the past, this is what that meant, this is what we're proposing that you sign now, and this is what this will do. so that they feel informed about their decision. I think you'll probably have a better chance of success if they feel informed about what they're agreeing to be a part of.
Thank you, Paul. I was gonna suggest that too, that we maybe include this in the March presentation to the Board of Commissioners, this recommendation. I guess we can vote on it next meeting, so we would carry this item, I guess, forward to the next meeting. If you would please be responsible, Denise, for bringing the Paris Climate Agreement.
I will.
And then, Paul, if you would please bring information about the Climate Mayor's
I will.
agreement, and then we can have that discussion. And I think that I personally would like to see a recommendation of one of them go forward to the commission. So I think if we can hammer that out next meeting. I'd hope to do it tonight, but if consensus is to do a little bit more research, then I think that would, time-wise, still work.
It's really interesting, just doing a search on Paris Climate Agreement and mayors, it's as though climatemayors.org puts the Paris Climate Agreement and, as probably, at the top of that, meaning that is what they're agreeing to as climate mayors. I don't know whether that's what you noticed when you researched it.
My understanding was that that a strong endorsement of the Paris Accord came from climate mayors, but I could be completely wrong about it. That's what I understood.
So it looks like that's what it actually says under climatemayors.org, is that 438 U.S. climate mayors commit to adopt, honor, and uphold the Paris Climate Agreement goals. So we may have stepped back from national commitment to it, but there's a lot of cities that are picking up the slack. And honestly, we're looking at issues that are global and national, but they're all going to have to come from local involvement, local commitment, so I think that beyond being symbolic, I think it's where you start. What can you do? You think globally, but you always act locally.
I think one of the challenges that would need to be overcome is you are dipping into federal politics. We do a beautiful job here locally of not having Democrat or Republican, and I just think that's a reality that we're going to face, good or bad. But with that, probably want to have some background on what the Paris Agreement was or does and why it's so important. And I think that might be a pivotal piece of information, because basically you're asking them to join the Paris Agreement, and they would want to know what that means.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will count on you to bring us up to speed on the Paris
will.
Agreement, and then,
I'll discuss the organization.
perfect. Okay.
On this, may I?
I don't think we're there in the agenda.
Yeah, we're not at public comment
No, no, it's
yet.
about the mayor's steering. It's item 3, because it was from your information given out at the last meeting.
But we're gonna do public comments. Let's save it for the end.
Okay.
The next item on our agenda is to talk about next month's agenda. Have we gotten confirmation about, from Palm Beach County, if they would be able to present their plan?
Not confirmation. We have reached out to them, and we'll get confirmation on that certainly in the next week.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to see if there's items that you guys would like to have added to next month's agenda.
I think I would argue that next month we should begin a discussion and a comparison of the 3 plans.
Okay.
Also, and I hope this isn't a premature recommendation, I was struck by something that Laura Thomas said. She told us that they would be revising LEAP, and that they would be adding a resiliency plan, an entire plan to LEAP. And then she said something which was fascinating. She said that they would use an economic argument to sell or to explain the rationale for the revised plan. And she specifically mentioned Moody's and banks and other financial institutions. So I've done a little digging in that area, and I would be happy to provide information for the committee from Standard & Poor's, from Marsh, from Moody's, from Zillow, et cetera, if you are interested in looking at an economic rationale for what we will ultimately present to the Board of Commissioners. In other words, and let me add a little bit to that. If you look at the LEAP, you see in there, in the first part of it, we want to be the community of choice in the Tampa Bay area. And then you look at page 2 of the Sarasota plan. And drum roll, I'll find it, wait a minute. First paragraph, page 2. The community that actively protects infrastructure to ensure continuity of public services will have a competitive advantage across economic, built, and natural environments as climate change makes a progressively greater impact on the region. If you look at the West Palm Beach plan, you're going to see something about them referring to, needing to stay ahead of the game from a not just financial, but staying ahead of the game such that the rating agencies like Standard & Poor recognize that they're staying ahead of the game. Would the committee be interested in looking at some of the information from these various financial institutions?
I think it's a little premature for that, just because we still have to get through the third plan, and then we also have to set what we're going to present to the board next month. And I think that that's going to be a lot to try to.
Can I ask the timeline for the commissioners meeting? Which meeting? What was the date of the meeting that we would be expected to do that? Because I think that I would think next month's meeting, a lot of it would be geared towards what you both are bringing to the table education-wise, and then compiling that. So if we don't have a March meeting to finalize that all would, before the commission meeting, that all would need to be finalized next month. So I think that, based on what I'm hearing up here, we have like 3 months worth of things for next month's agenda.
Yeah.
But the priority would need to be what you guys bring in, educating us, and then formalizing what's going to the Board of Commissioners. So what date? Sorry, I don't have any of that information.
March 24th is what our calendar is showing us as the last meeting before the end of March.
And so we would want to try to be on that agenda.
Yeah,
as
and I want
March
to take
20.
some of the pressure off. This is up to you all, how much you want to present to them in this March thing. So really, I would probably, I don't need to tell you this, but quality over quantity.
And I think the more informed we are, we're able to present more of a quality than quantity as well. So that's just my 2 cents on next month's agenda.
We're not anticipating presenting them a suggestion for a formal plan
No.
yet, are we?
No.
Pressure.
No, but I think
No
we
pressure.
need to have our own,
That's what we've
I
been
think,
doing.
I think 2 hours of next month's meeting, is, we may find ourselves needing that part of that March meeting to do it. So there's just a lot that's been presented for next month.
And it could be as simple as an update.
That's right.
It could be an update. We've had this many meetings. We've looked looked at these plans. We're at this point in our evaluation, and
Thank you,
we want you
Paul.
to join the,
no, I would-
and we want
that's-
you to
that's
join
what I
the
was
climate
thinking.
mayors.
Thesis on what our group has done.
Nightmare that you're supposed to have your essay written, you're walking into the classroom, it's your finals, and you're, whoa,
And you forgot your pants.
yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at the calendar. So March, our meeting would be the 19th. And then the BOC meeting would be the 24th. So that does give us a little wiggle room. Our next meeting would be, is slated for February the 20th. And you had a question about, so I wanna-
Yes, I do have a question. I know for fact that I can't be at March 19th meeting. And my question was, how hard fast is it that these meetings are on the third Thursday? Is there a possibility of the second or the fourth Thursday for that month? Or is that completely unacceptable? Or is that where the alternate steps in? Because I know I have to be out of town for a family event, so I'm just asking.
I would, do you want to go ahead? I was going to say, I would think procedurally, that's why we have our two alternates.
Right.
And that would,
And you could still submit your information to Irene ahead, of your departure, so that your
And I
information,
can watch you.
yes. So you can still be part of it, even if you're not here.
I can participate by Skype, maybe.
okay, yeah, because I just think if we start moving, it's going to get into.
I was just asking. Yeah, this is where I assume that an alternate takes that place. Thank you.
So I was trying to look up when the purchase agreement with Duke was, and it's September 2020. I thought it was going to be much sooner, but we still got some time on that.
I've got some information under my comments coming up I want to share with you all that kind of touches on that.
Okay. So, any other thoughts about next meeting? I've got a few, but I was waiting. Okay, so the one we've already talked about is the meeting with the presentation to the Board of Commissioners. I also, in speaking with Paul, thank you for helping to kind of think some of this through ahead, is that we've got the plan itself is starting to, I think, take some initial form with city staff, and with the way that our the resolution was written to form our committee, we're supposed to be helping to guide that document and add information to it and add, put our fingerprints on it. And I think that that I personally, not speaking for the board, but I personally think that that would be a really important value that we bring. And realizing that because of sunshine, we're going to all have to be in a room having a conversation. We can't dial it in and have one-off conversations. So I think just putting this bug in everybody's ear is that at the next meeting, I would like to have on the agenda kind of a discussion on how we plan on interfacing with that plan. So if you could be thinking about what your vision is of how you think that we would best plug in. So is it that the city's going to have workshop meetings with staff, and they're going to have roundtables like we saw in the Sarasota video, where they're all kind of discussing the planning of the plan and the early draft of the plan, and then we would be coming to those conversations and those meetings. That may mean that some of those meetings are going to be during the day. And I know that we have our meetings in the evening to accommodate work schedules, but just kind of putting that out there, that I think that it's going to require more time than just the 2 hours once a month that we're currently doing once that starts moving forward. And like to your point, Paul, about the financials, like that's a conversation piece that I think would be well used, or, valuable to have in those conversations. And I think that that it's just going to take more time than, like I said, these monthly meetings. And then I also wanted to ask you all to be kind of doing a skill inventory of yourselves. Are you a good writer? Are you a good editor? Do you want to break it down by topic where you're passionate about? You know, is it trees or do you want to have a hand in every part of it? So just kind of thinking about and coming prepared to next month's meeting to kind of discuss how you vision us working on that plan with staff.
I'm lost. What do you see as the format for the staff, city staff, and this committee going forward? How does this work, and how do we integrate?
Well, I think that's the conversation that I want to have next month.
Okay?
And that's what I want to
Anyone had
add.
an opportunity to look at it was a short webinar on the development of the sustainability plan. I know Judy mentioned that
No, it wasn't short.
it was 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 45 minutes.
But there
that-
was so much information in there, and it was very good information too. It was like a guideline on developing a plan, and it was excellent. I took copious notes, and I sat there for
Same here.
a lot of time. It's a great guideline.
And this is what?
It's a video that Denise had submitted,
Oh, yes.
that Irene
Thank
sent
you.
out
So-
to everyone.
Okay, right.
So I would.
Denise, that's one of the things I haven't gotten to yet, but I'm really,
It is good.
you piqued my interest now. I do want to see that.
It's a good starting point because it just breaks down what the most across-the-board topics are that every city will deal with. But I was really struck when reading the City of Sarasota's climate adaptation plan, the tone in comparison to both Largo and West Palm Beach was really, really serious and very heavy. The whole beginning part, was very heavy in the statistics, very sobering, and it didn't come across as being something that was even just, well, this would be a really good idea if we do this. It was like, we have to do this now for the survival of our city. I mean, it was very matter of fact, that this was something that there's no wiggle room. We've got to start addressing these problems, and I love they're ready for 100. I think that setting a goal like that, can be almost an overarching plan that helps you meet other goals that are subsidiary to that. Just being, we're operating on renewable energy exclusively by these certain dates. But there are big differences, but the thing that one webinar that I sent out did was tackled all of the very consistent elements in every sustainability plan that's written. And so we can look at breaking it down with different members, different groups within the city, different departments within the city, and participating with them and their portions of it. I mean, it just at least was something that you could use as a structure. That's all. I felt like it was necessary because I was reading all of these different plans and I was thinking, well, there are pieces that are very much alike, but they've all got different flavor, and what is consistent, because like we have said, we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. We want to use some sort of structure that everybody is using for this discussion and make it applicable to Tarpon Springs. And, we have some issues that are really, really, vital for the future of the community.
And back to Dr. Robinson's question, how is all this going to work? And that's going to be that discussion that Dory talked about. There's really a range of possibilities and how we all work together to get a plan drafted. It could be the range of you all wait for it to be drafted and you write comments on it. I'm hoping we're not at that end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is you all write your sections and I wait for you to put it together and then I write comments on it. We're probably not going to be on that end either. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. I see us all working on an outline together, figuring out what sections who might be able to help on. And there might be some sections that are just extremely specialized or technical that we say, you know what, this has to be studied, but it probably won't happen in this room. And that's where we need to look at outside expertise, whether it be another city or the consultants. You know, I really hesitate to go there. We may need to for some things because that involves a budget that we would have to go try to find. And that's just a risk, I think, to us. We're in a lot more control if we're doing things ourselves. So just giving you a general answer to how that discussion might go.
So it has to be collaborative, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, it's going to be collaborative. The citizens piece is critical. And I
Yes.
love what Stevie said about the fact that they actually took the time to go out and meet. There's an opportunity that's coming up that's very interesting, and I don't know how we'd approach this as a group, but it's the League of Women Voters is having an evening over at the Unitarian Universalist Church on climate. And it just might be a great time to meet other people in this community besides the Turn the Tide for Tarpon members that are really passionate about what's happening to climate and how vital it is to the future of our city. That's next Thursday? Next Thursday.
Irene, do we have a clear idea what the agenda is going to look like based on all this discussion, or do you need us to restate it? Okay. Yeah. I know there's been a lot of talk, but.
And in terms of prioritizing, I think that we would want to have that conversation again about the climate mayors. And then make sure that we have set what we would like to present to the Board of Commissioners, because that's may or may not need to be carried on to the March meeting. To have a discussion about how we're going to engage with the process. And then I would invite everybody to please watch the webinar that that was sent around so that we can, that can help inform that discussion. And then if we can get there, start to look at the various plans.
And that's all in addition to the presentation by West Palm.
Right,
If
right.
we're able to do that.
So that was why I kind of wanted to prioritize just then.
Now, if that somehow slips off because they can't do it, then that would give us more time to work through. But for now, I think, we can put that as the framework.
Are we all comfortable with that agenda then for next month? All right, so then moving on to public comments.
Peter Delacus, 514 Ashland Avenue. It was kind of ironic at the last meeting to get your agenda notes from our meeting of December 2nd, 2008. And in here, in the minutes, it indicates that at the time, Commissioner Delacus said the board should review ways to implement number 8, which is with regards to increasing fuel efficiency, reduce number of vehicles, anti-idling and such like that. And at the time, I recommended converting vehicles to diesel or other things. And what was so ironic about that is I didn't get a chance to stay at the last meeting, but what I wanted to come up and speak to you all about already was about a month and a half prior to your meeting last month. On the agenda, and you'll see these in the consent agenda and sometimes in the special consent agenda items, the purchase of vehicles. The last one, and I'm not sure if it was in the end of November or the first part of December, there was a special consent agenda item where the city bought for the police department and fire department all Yukons, Tahoes, Suburbans. I've seen police department has a Ford pickup truck 4x4. Now, I did see they used it during Epiphany to haul a trailer, but 12 years later, we still got a board that keeps buying inefficient vehicles. Now, they did buy, I think, an Altima or something else for a small, and I can understand big trucks for your public works and sanitation. But there is no effort to get the city to start looking at more efficient vehicles. So, and the anti-idling, because I know I had this as an issue a while back with the police, and they said, oh, you know, our guys don't idle. They idle all the frickin' time. I drive by the church on the bayou sometimes late at night, because I go between my house and my mom's house. There's a cop car sitting there, he's idling. I can go back an hour later going back home, he's idling. So that's what I kind of wanted to talk about last week, but how I want to bring that into a discussion today, I was thinking about this. We need to find some way to put sustainability and things that are sustainability policies and procedures in the comprehensive plan. That's where we need to put it in, because that is a guiding document not only for the city's growth, but it's also for based on land development issues. And I also believe that somewhere on the line, if we have big projects that are affecting large areas of habitat, they should get somehow reviewed through a sustainability group or committee. That's what we were trying years ago, to form an environmental action committee for those purposes, and they used to blow it off and say it's the planning and zoning. It goes to the planning and zoning, and there wasn't enough in the comprehensive plan to take any actions. So if you're looking at things to look at, to recommend to the board, and I know we don't have a planning and zoning director now, and so that might be a little difficult to coordinate with that particular department, but I honestly feel that somehow we need to put sustainability and environmental initiatives, actions, policies, and procedures in the comp plan. And lastly, if I have a half a moment, in the meeting, or the Skype last meeting, when the girl said, don't be afraid to think outside the box. Now, to me, recycling is a big issue. I am totally, and I've said this before, and we don't do enough to encourage our commercial businesses to recycle. We provide bins for, you know, the residents and stuff, but we don't need to do enough for that. This is way out of the box, and I don't think we can do it ourselves. It would have to be something that would have to be put out, because it would involve waste management. But if we could develop, and maybe we'd have to go onto our own sanitation system to do this and get rid of waste management. But if we could develop a system where people are charged based on the poundage of their waste, and then we give them credits for the poundage of their recycling. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I drive around and people are putting out their recycling on trash days because they're just putting it out. They don't know, and it has to get picked up. But if we could put some kind of system in where you get credit for your recycling and you get charged for your waste, it's going to incentivize people to say, well, I don't want 50 pounds and half of that's glass, plastic, cardboard. Basically, I swear to God, I can throw away basically one large bag of trash a week, which is scrap paper and things that, you know, are not recyclable or mulchable. So there is an incentive to find ways to reduce waste. So that's my way out of the box idea, but that's a big part of, you know, our sustainability. And I thank you for not only the time to speak to you, but the seriousness and what I've observed in the last two meetings, the earnestness in finding solutions for our city. Because I live near the bayou, and I tell you, in 15 years, if things don't change, I have to sell my house. Because I ain't going to be able to get in and out of there on certain days. And you want to see the effect, as Dr. Robinson said, economically? All those houses along the bayous that are $800,000, $900,000, nobody's going to want to buy them. Your property values are going to go down, and you're going to have the taxes to do what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
Can I respond to what Peter just said? Is that appropriate?
In your committee comments.
Okay.
So we'll go to staff comments now.
Thank you. Paul Smith here, Public Services Director. I did prepare some thoughts, and I was very happy to see that some of these we're already heading in this direction, so I don't really need to belabor it. But I did want to update you on several things. Just this week, and I want to pass something around. I was invited to participate. Let me give you the good ones. So it's all the same thing. I was invited to participate in a regional meeting with Duke Energy, and that was this week down in the Clearwater area. And they wanted to discuss working and partnering with us on net zero carbon emissions. There's been a shift in that company, and we were assured by the representatives. In fact, I asked if this could be distributed for general consumption, and he said yes, so I got permission before I passed this out. But that, to me, says a lot that they're willing to put this out publicly. There's a lot to absorb here, but I'll just give you some of the highlights. From their corporate top of the chain, they're making some new commitments to reducing carbon emissions net zero. And what that really means is by 2050, they're looking to cut the CO2 emissions to a net zero. Now, what does that mean? When they explain, that doesn't mean that there will be no longer any fossil fuel burning plants. But what it does mean is they will have other ways, such as sequestration or other things, to offset any of those carbon emissions to attain a net zero. And why this is exciting to us is, you know, we're all sharing the same atmosphere. So if somebody else is going to do it, that you can look at that a couple ways. That's that much less that we have to do, or it just means that we can make even a bigger impact with our combined efforts. So I think this is big news. This is just, you know, the big announcement type thing, and the details will be forthcoming. I'll continue to participate in that group. We'll be talking about things like how do we share the community energy data so that we can be smart about our decisions. It's kind of like one of the analogies is how do you know if your diet's working if you don't know how much you weigh when you start? That's kind of the idea with getting this energy data, and it's historically been very difficult to get. So this has been identified as an issue. Some of the larger communities have been working on this problem for a while, so we're going to be able to benefit from what they've learned and work as a group to start getting that data together. That's going to help us with the planning that we're doing. They're also looking at expanding the electric vehicle infrastructure, which is exciting. You know, they've already been working with us on charging stations. They want to do more of that. And Dory probably has more information on that part of it. Solar, partnering with solar power and possibly other renewable energy type things. So, you know, take this with you, look it over, and I'll keep updating you on things as they move forward. But I think this is a major development and a big shift from what I would have told you just a month ago. The next item is I did attend the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council Sustainability Summit last week. There was a lot of good information there. There was a presentation by a representative of NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They're based out of Colorado. They do a lot of research on things, including solar panels. But one of the main takeaways I got was he said, if you're a local government trying to do meaningful reductions in greenhouse gases, rooftop solar is important, but it's not at the top. He says the real top things are facilities efficiency, buildings, and transportation. That's not to say that the solar panels aren't important. We're going to keep doing those things. But I did think that was very meaningful to understand how important the facilities and the transportation component are. I brought that information back to our staff meeting. You know, in that presentation, they talked about directors getting together. We have that same structure. And, you know, I talked to the group about that, and the city manager was interested in Largo has done a lot of things recently with vehicles, even with their police department. So we're going to get a team together, and it's perfect timing because we've got our budget process coming up in the next couple months, and we're going to go over there and see what they've done and what we can apply here and make some moves towards, you know, a different kind of fleet. You know, I do understand there's some pickup truck type things that are coming down the pipeline. That's going to be a big breakthrough, but I think in the beginning, we can look at administrative vehicles, things that we can implement, you know, in this coming year to make our fleet more green. So, but I wanted you to know that, you know, just because my title doesn't say sustainability in it, I function in that way. And as a director, we can get things done pretty rapidly as a group. So that's important. And the last thing I want to advise you on is, you know, that's my role, is I assist and advise you. And hopefully that's what I'm doing here. But I really want to emphasize you're going to get people that are going to bring you ideas on what they think you should work on as a group. It's going to keep happening. And I'm going to advise you that, you know, people want you to look at projects and weigh in on projects. And, you know, down the road, I can see that making more sense. But right now, I think it's the planning and the policy making that are the areas where we can make the biggest impact. That said, the comprehensive plan was mentioned under public comment. There's actually an opportunity for us as a committee to work on that. I talked to Planning and Zoning. They're going to be looking at this summer, doing some amendments to the Land Development Code. So as that comes along, I really think that would be a great opportunity for us as a group to look at things like how we're putting together landscaping and new developments, all sorts of things like that. I mean, that's just, so when you heard that good advice on we need to balance the planning, I know this stuff can get kind of dry with actually doing things. I think getting into this land development code and saying, you know what, we should add some language here. We should fix this. I mean, that's some doing in itself. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for those updates. I think that that's important for us all to hear, that the city is starting to look at the fleet and how we can be more efficient with the fleet, and also looking at how we can prioritize efficiency with our buildings as well. And I'm excited by the steps that we're taking, and think that a lot of the work that we're doing, the city can also internally be moving towards these things before we have the plan put together. I don't think that, you know, we have to necessarily wait for some of these good ideas to be worked on, and so I thank you for pushing some of those ideas internally. So with that said, open it up for committee comments. Taylor, do you want to start us off?
I do kind of like how they're going to amend the land development code, and I think biodiversity is really important. Maybe something in there should be included. I don't know if surveys are probably expensive, but I feel like there needs to be a little bit more care taken towards the native plants, and that'll help the native wildlife and just a lot of different things. Maybe use a little bit more native planting, but I don't know how much you can really put in there to not make people do it, but suggest it, you know. I don't know if there's incentives we can do, but I feel like it's important to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. You're going to find when we get to reviewing it that there's a lot of stuff in there already. I think maybe some of the things we want to talk about is how much teeth do we put in it? How prescriptive do we get? Because there is something about using native plants. There's even a list of the ones to use, but perhaps it's missing something that we need to make sure that it does get done, you know, rather than saying these are the things you should use, you know, you change it around how you word it.
Denise?
Yeah, I had two thoughts that were relating to the plan that we heard tonight. And that was, you know, I wish I had asked about it. maybe you heard some, Paul, at the meeting with Duke. You know, Stevie mentioned the FPL Solar Together that Duke is sponsoring, and it's community solar, and I wasn't sure whether that was something that is only available now for commercial or for city, or if it's going to roll out for residential. But I think that's very exciting, you know, because I was hoping for something like that a long time ago for areas where we live in a historical district where really can't put solar on the roof, you know, but to participate in something meaningful where you're able to help finance the development of that, because that's, you know, something that we did where we came from. We were investing in wind energy. So that's very exciting. Another thing that she mentioned, the canopy increase, and I think that it's going to have to be addressed at some point, and I don't know whether we want to look at that as a group, but there was a law passed in the middle of last year, and it was statewide for property owners to have the right to trim and remove trees without permit because of hurricane potential damage. And I think there's this, I don't know whether it's going to require some education, you know, that the value of canopy, the value in mitigating heat, you know, but it seems like, do we approach it by interacting with the state as citizens, or, you know, city asking, because they were basically removing the right of the cities to have any say over whether trees could be removed or not. It was just strictly a landowner right. So that's all. It's for future thought. And I don't know whether there's any answer. Do you know anything about that, or?
That's a tough one, because that was probably some representative that put a bill together that was like for the people against government, and it's hard to overcome those sorts of sentiments. It's like it's portrayed as government being too onerous on the people, you know, that's I'm sure how
Much control.
Yeah, what that angle was, but even though it's for a very good purpose.
On the flip side, they can't keep you from having a garden in your front yard.
Right.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, it's
And rain barrels, and, you know, that's been something that in some places was illegal for a long time, but rain barrels are okay now.
Right.
But we can focus on what we can control, which is
Right.
city property and what we're doing with that.
And public education on the value of the canopy.
We just had 5 trees removed from our yard. And we use O'Neill's, and O'Neill's has 7 or 8 arborists, the most in any company. And we were advised that that law is not without significant limitations. The trees could only be removed if they were diseased or if they posed a risk to other trees in the area. And so, and all of the 5 trees met those criteria, but there are other criteria, and I would bet that the city arborist could fill us in on what limitations there are for homeowners removing trees. I don't think it can just be, you know, because you want to. I think we found that there are limitations on that.
That's good news.
Paul, you talked about adjusting or us making suggestions to the comprehensive plan. Is that part of our charge from the BOC? Do we need to request from them that we would respectfully like to submit suggestions to the comprehensive plan?
Well, I can tell you, I drafted the final thing, and those sorts of things were in mind, and I was just going to try to pull that up. But the short answer is I believe that that's consistent with what you're chartered to do. because that has to do with the issues of sustainability. And, you know, how are you going to influence that if you're not recommending? Of course, these would be recommendations. You're going to put your recommended text, and it may not all be approved. I mean, I don't know, but that's a possibility. But yes, that's certainly within your purview.
Just one thought. Peter mentioned recycling, and it reminded me of something I read today in the New York Times climate blog that I subscribe to. The city of San Francisco recycles 80%, and they've been doing that for more than a decade, compared with the rest of the country averaging about 34%. Contrast that with Europe as a group of countries averaging about 50%. So somehow San Francisco is finding a way to get its citizens and its businesses to recycle considerably more than other parts of the country and other countries. And I remember vaguely that there is a carrot and stick aspect to their plan, but that's all I can say. But there's certainly a model we could
I know
look
they
at.
charge, like in Maine and certain, like that deposit fee for bottles and certain large plastic liter containers, so.
That's all.
Okay.
I wanted to get back to your question. You know, one thing we're talking about for the March board report would be a list of what you've done and what you're planning to do. And that would be one of those things you could bring up. And if, for some reason, I mean, the board ultimately controls what they want you all to work on. And if someone had a concern with that, I think that would be the time to mention it. But I don't see anything in the resolution that prohibits you from doing that. The first, it says duties of the committee, subject areas may include increasing energy efficiency, conserving water, reducing waste, protecting sensitive natural areas, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that would fall
Sounds like
under
we
that.
covered it.
No, I just, I appreciate the input and putting the brakes on, so to speak, because I think everybody's very, very excited here, and we want to, you know, we want to be at the World Series, and we're really just
At practice.
we're at spring training right now. You know, I mean, we're and I think that between everybody on this committee, everybody is really motivated and just really wants to push forward. But it is important to kind of take that step back and make sure that we have a process for doing that and really doing it right from the beginning instead of jumping ahead. So that's just my only comment is I do appreciate the activity and the conversations that are happening, and then the ability for somebody to kind of step in and just say, we're not there yet. Like that's great, but we're not there yet. And so and I want to thank Paul, if it was you, for getting the speakers together. If you reached out to them, they've been very, very helpful in just, again, giving us a little bit of a starting point where, how did they do it? So, yeah, that's.
Well, thank you for that, and we're happy to do it. It's really a team effort. IT has been helping quite a bit, along with Ashley of my department and the clerk's office as well. And it was a fair bit of work. I was really glad that things settled down there. It wasn't looking too great in the middle, but
Thank you very much.
yeah.
No, personally, I appreciate that because it does help to hear how other people got started. You know, they are throwing ideas out that I never thought about including as we start moving forward, so that's been very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks, Dory. I appreciate what you're saying, Karen, and I also feel this sense of excitement about our work. Wanting to know or thinking, is there a way that we can gently accelerate something, you know, maybe with a different vehicle or something, but get something going. Because after this committee was formed, I was really surprised by how many people came up and were just so happy that the Sustainability Committee was formed. They were happy of everyone who was on it. They were happy that Dory was going to be chair and co-chair. And I mean, there was a wide community knowledge about it and community excitement. So what Stevie mentioned about building on positive community experience, I think that's also important. So I was thinking of how could we keep this community enthusiasm alive, feed it without jumping ahead, without trying to like run as fast as we can to get to a certain point. What is there an easy fit that we might do? And one of the things that she mentioned that really intrigued me, and I think might be a simple way for us to engage, was she talked about partnering with the Arbor Day Foundation. And when she talked about, and this would solve a couple of things. She said you can drag and drop your trees, see what the energy savings are. So that's community awareness, that's replanting our canopy. But we are already partners with the Arbor Day Foundation. At the Touch-A-Truck, they generally have trees that they give out, the pine trees or the couple of different trees that the what are they called, magnolias. So I thought maybe we could kind of do something to build on the community support, to keep this energy going, to keep what our mission is alive, and possibly do a piece of it that we're already engaged in. So if we're partners with the Community or the Arbor Day Foundation already, this would be a way for us to have positive messaging to show how our canopy can be increased, and also people save money by planting trees around their house, and how that will increase the value of their home by 20%, whatever it is, 10 or 20% worth more by having mature trees on their property. So it's just a thought, but I think that as we go forward, there might be some things that we can do that we'd call it low-hanging fruit, or things that are not really shaking things up a lot, or challenging the commission, or before we get everything that we want to do thought through and have our plan together, but just something that we could do, and that's what came to mind. So I wanted to share that with you guys because it might be a possibility.
One of the things that I have been concerned with is also the community involvement, because I live in a community where we have a clubhouse and we have organizations, we have our boards, and people have approached me being thankful that we do have a sustainability committee, that things are coming along. And I think that kind of opens up an opportunity for us to do something. I know there are a lot of communities that do have organizations, homeowners associations, that have meetings where I think we would be readily accepted to go into and do some kind of little presentation at those kind of meetings further down the line when we're ready to do those kinds of things. But I think we have ample opportunities to do those kinds of things. And I think getting the people involved is very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got some questions. So I know at the last meeting I had asked about all of the different plans that the city has. Are we still compiling that information?
Yes, I sent a request out to the department heads to give me some ideas. What I was really after is a short list of documents, because I know we're all challenged right now with material. And I didn't want to give you 20 things to look at. The initial feedback I'm getting is very consistent with what I originally said, which is the comprehensive plan. I mean, the name just in itself says a lot, but there are all of these elements to this comprehensive plan. And it does already include a lot of aspects of sustainability and resiliency. In fact, most recently, there was a coastal element of this comprehensive plan that was updated to reflect, actually with state law, that it had to be done. So that was a motivator. But there are already some updates to the comprehensive plan that show that. But I will work on a way to get that accessible to you. I think you can already get to it on the city website, but I'm working on a way with the city manager's office to get a link to that link and put it on our sustainability page. So my goal is to build up a list of documents, but my initial findings are that list might be surprisingly short. I think that, but just that one thing is
Huge.
A 3-ring
Yeah.
binder. So that's a good news, actually. I think that's easier to work with than 26 different documents. So I'll
Excellent.
continue to work on that, and you can check in on the sustainability site from time to time between now and the next meeting, and we can talk about it more then, too.
Okay. I have a question about the timeline for the land development code. I heard summer, so I want to be able to plan to know when and how we can engage. So if we could get a better understanding of that for the next meeting.
Sure. That is the most recent information I got as of this afternoon was summer. And I've made it very clear to the Planning and Zoning Department that we are interested in being involved as a committee on that. So I think that's well received. So, but I will continue to give updates on that and as the new information comes available.
Great, thank you. I do think that, and thank you for reading the portion in our guiding document about our role. I think that one of the biggest, most impactful legacy kind of things that our group does, besides help to write the plan, is to be engaging in the comprehensive plan for the city. I mean, it's the city's like how we do business, and if we can continue to infuse that with sustainable practices, and resilient practices in the document itself, then that's just how the city does business day to day. So just wanted to reiterate that I think that that's where a big part of our value add is. I also wanted to thank you both for bringing up the telling our story and being out there with the community, because I think that that's really critically important, is for the community to understand how valuable and how it touches their lives. Because I think a lot of times, everybody's so busy with everything in their world, but that understanding that sustainability and resilience and having a place to continue to be is like part of the air that we breathe and like our roots to where we live and where we are. So I think that the more we can continue to connect those ideas to individual residents of the city, I think that that's really important. And to that, I also wanted to see kind of where we are, or where the city staff is with developing the resiliency plan, kind of a quick update, and then think about how we can, because I tasked us with, for next month's meeting, how we as a group are going to engage with that process. But I would like to hear how we're engaging the community all the way through with that process as well. I think that if the city's starting to put the plan together, I think it would be wise to share out to the community that we're doing this and start to solicit interest and trying to get people to think about their part of the solution and start thinking about coming to these planning meetings and well before we ask them to come to a meeting. So how do we start to inform the community more about the process? So if, you know what I mean, if I can get a kind of a better understanding of where you guys are with the timeline.
Well, really, I want that to be part of this committee, and what I recommend is when we get into public communications, we're going to want to run that plan through the Board of Commissioners so that they're comfortable. So we could make this whole strategy, we talk about where we've been and where we're going. That could be part of the where we're going. We recommend community engagement. These are the ideas we want to do, and get some feedback from the board, and then proceed along that path as a team. In fact, I had an idea here I wanted to share that what I'll plan to do is put together an outline of some suggestions for you for the board update. There may be some things that we have already done that maybe just aren't coming to mind to you. For example, we put our own city webpage on sustainability up since we've all formed. I mean, that's a big leap that we didn't have before. So, and there's many examples of that. So I'm just going to put that together and we can email it out. Of course, you guys don't want to discuss that in your emails. That's just for you to think about and prompt your discussion next time. So maybe we get to the consensus more quickly at the next meeting on your outline. And certainly it's not cast in stone. Your input, of course, needs to be in there too.
Great idea. Thank you. And then along the lines of the tree and the touch, incorporating our committee into the Touch a Truck, the timeline of that is usually springtime?
It was just set for February 29th.
Oh,
so it's coming up.
So it's really probably too soon to be able to do anything. But I really do like the idea of engaging with the Arbor group, and same thing. I don't think that we have to wait until we have a plan in
Right.
order to do that work,
Well, and they said that it was paid for through the tree bank money.
which we
is-
have
We have.
a source
So
of revenue
We
for
have a
it.
source of revenue to support that.
Right.
Can I ask a question? It was my understanding that the city does have a policy on tree plant replacing. So when you cut a tree, you must replace.
That's correct.
Is that down the tubes now because of the state?
I don't believe so. I mean,
So
I
that's
can,
still in effect. So that I think, to me, takes care of a lot of our concerns. So we're, not only are we limited because we must, and I understand it's quite extensive too. It's not just plant a tree, it's got to be match what you took down. If you took down a 10-foot tree, you've got to replace 10 feet of tree, whether it be 5 2-foot trees or whatever, was my understanding. And I know in our community where I live, we totally enforce that. So that, I think, is a big thing too for our city. It's one of the great things that I like.
Absolutely. And to that point, I was wondering if you had a chance to see if the city has a master plan for identifying gaps and where we could add trees, if we could know more about that.
okay. That one I'm going to have to bring back to you. I don't have current information on that right now.
Because I think that would be useful to see, like, citywide, do we have a plan?
Yeah.
And instead of just ad hoc, like, let's add a random tree here, like, let's kind of be deliberate about what that looks like. And I think that our group could help with that.
It comes to mind that there is a tree replanting program for the different parks, and I know at the cemetery they have had some, I'd have to refresh my memory, but it seems to me that there's a plan on that. And I agree with you, Dory, 100%. I think that maybe the Touch a Truck is coming up kind of quick, but I'm wondering when Arbor Day is. Maybe we could create an event to kind of showcase Arbor Day and replanting trees, and people love trees. They love trees, so.
I do know we're planning to give trees away at the Touch a Truck. That is part of the thing. And if there's a way that there's a postcard brochure or something that we can put with that to promote this program, I'll find out in the meantime.
How is the type of tree determined?
I need to research that. I don't know the details. I think it's based on diameters, and, if you cut down 10 inches worth of tree diameter, you need to replace it with an equivalent amount of trees.
I'm talking about the trees at the Touch a Truck.
Oh, I think there's several choices. I don't remember what the species are, but, yeah, I think it's, of course, beneficial trees.
The way that this House Bill 1159 reads, it's on private property rights, and it specifically prohibits local governments from requiring property owners to replant such trees. I mean, it was really gung-ho.
Wow.
Individualist. You can do what you want with your property. But, it's not very long, but I would recommend just Googling it and reading it. It's on private property rights. It was passed, the last action was the 27th of June of last year.
What's the House Bill number?
1159,
Thank you.
private property rights.
Okay. I think those were all of my comments and questions. So if I don't hear anything else, then thank you all for your time. I'm excited to start a new year with you, and we will adjourn. It is 8:08.